In 2005, 6, I think this is when the cloud really started. Yeah, when Amazon, the bookshop, decided that their IT department is now a hosting provider. That's how I would say it in simple words. And everyone was laughing. And I think after a few years, nobody was laughing anymore. Amazon Web Services is now the largest infrastructure provider in the world.
The hosting industry has gone through incredible changes.
When you talk about shared hosting, we talk about 300, 400, even 1,000% margins, like gross margins in some cases. Really crazy. This is why so many people also are so rich in this industry.
One of the things that surprises me about the hosting industry is that there are still companies that are growing extremely fast. Cool. Lukas, thank you very much for joining me on the Mail Channels podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you explain where you are in the world right now?
So I consider myself a global citizen, but I travel a lot, but I'm mostly based in Switzerland, near to Zurich.
Right. Nice. Very nice. I wanted to start by just talking a bit about your background and your history with WebPros, and more generally in the web hosting industry. You've been with WebPros and its various predecessors for over 18 years, which is an eternity on the internet. Can you step us through your journey from your early days at SWSoft until your current role today?
Yeah, I've seen that you researched me very well. It's actually now over 20 years.
Oh boy. Okay.
So it's a bit difficult where to start, but I try to make it not too long. So originally, I actually didn't join SWSoft, but a company named Confix. I'm not so sure if that is still something people remember. Confix was the control panel based on Perl before Plesk, and that was created in Germany. I joined this company actually with 23 years old when I was still studying business information systems as a reseller for Switzerland. In 2004, I joined the company to be the account manager for Switzerland, Austria, French, and Italy. And then SWSoft came in and acquired Confix, Plesk, Virtuoso, HSP Complete, and Parallels Automation, and brought everything together. This was mostly by the former creator and founder of Acronis, if for some people that still know that. And later, I was then also supporting to open an office in France, and also switched more and more into selling our large-scale cloud automation platform called Parallels Automation. That means a switch from a pure partnership model like you need to the service providers, like you need for the control panels, to more like an enterprise sales. I had a lot of learnings in helping telecom companies to build their own cloud offerings. And together with my colleague Niels Hünecke, who is still here in WebPros as Chief Strategy Officer these days, I was building up the European division of Parallels. On the go, we actually already did some acquisitions that's maybe a bit less known. So there were other control panels on the market like Helm, that was a Windows control panel, Enzyme, that was another competitor, as well as hSphere. And so we did some M&A already quite early. But after these 10 years, I got quite bored with sales and leading and managing sales teams. I mean, I'm not saying I'm bored of sales because it's something I anyway do all the time. But I moved into marketing because I had an appetite and had a mentor who basically told me, why don't you move to marketing? And I said, like, why marketing? And after one night sleeping over it, I actually went to our CMO and to our CEO and said, guys, I think I could add value to our marketing team. And that gave me the opportunity to be a customer-focused, customer-grown-up person coming from sales with early marketing knowledge to learn all the marketing and online scale and stuff from scratch. And I also had super great learnings at this time from many people that we hired from Microsoft, because in my perspective, Microsoft is one of the best marketing organizations in
Hmm.
software and in technology in general. So I was really thankful that I was able to learn a lot of marketing stuff from these Microsoft people also. And then later in 2015, we basically carved out Plesk, and the rest of Parallels got put into or cut into pieces.
Right.
And I was asked to either go to Ingram Micro with the automation platform or to join Plesk, and Niels being the CEO of Plesk at this time. And so this was also rather a quick decision for me to be able to join Plesk, because I knew the finances of both parts and I knew how profitable Plesk was. And so we I was able to build out the whole marketing team for Plesk over a bit more than 3 years. And step by step, I always build business and business entities in a way that I can transfer it later to an operational person, because I never try to make things depending on myself. And I have been asked to focus more on growth. And growth at this stage was mostly that Plesk is available on all the hyperscale cloud marketplaces. Maybe we're going to speak about that later a little bit in this discussion. There was also a lot of opportunity in building an ecosystem, having now more than 100 different third-party software vendors that we partner with and consolidated. That's still a 25 million plus budget and revenue for WebPros today, and still growing between 15 and 20% year over year. This is where I first time also started my first footsteps in M&A.
Hmm.
So besides continuous education of myself through advanced growth studies in Reforge, or financial modeling evaluation in Corporate Finance Institute, I worked with coaches in the US and in UK that teach me also like the creative part of M&A and creative deal making. And since now about 2.5 years, I do only M&A for WebPros, and I'm still a kind of an influencer and also advisor to our leadership team mostly. And maybe personally, I'm 43. My partner and me have no kids yet, but we love going to the nature in Switzerland, but also in other countries. We love mountain biking, we love good food, we love traveling, and we're based in Switzerland near Zurich.
Excellent. During the last 20 years that you've been working with WebPros and its predecessors, the hosting industry has gone through incredible changes. Can you talk about how the landscape has evolved since you began in the hosting industry? What have been the major shifts over that time? Obviously, from your viewpoint at WebPros, you've seen everything from a really high level and have probably interacted with many of the key players in the industry during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. We had we have over 2,500 hosting partners globally, and we have seen a lot. I would say in the early days, we have been doing a lot of thought leadership also. Before Parallels at this time and Virtuoso, there was no VPS or virtual private server offering. Yeah, there was some control panels, or there was this. Some people still maybe recall the Sun Cobalt racks. That was
Yes.
like real boxes,
Yeah.
and the control panels were literally kind of a replacement for these boxes, because it's a UI and it simplifies complexity. This is what it all was about. Simplify complexity, simplify security, simplify operations, and then scale. And
Hmm.
this was the time where shared hosting was something new, dedicated was hosting was a thing, and VPS or virtual private server hosting was something innovative. Yeah. I
Hmm.
would say themes at these days were huge gross margins. When you talk about shared hosting, we talk about 300, 400, even 1,000% margins, like gross margins in some
Wow.
cases. Really crazy. This is why so many people also are so rich in this industry. And in the end, it was a little bit, if you look at shared hosting and VPS, it was like a leasing business or car leasing business. So you take a server, take the cake, split it into pieces, and sell it in a subscription model. Yeah. And to be very honest, and I don't want to use very bad words, but it was very often shitty products for cheap costs
Right.
at crazy prices that people, because people didn't understand it. Yeah? There was the time when you paid for a dedicated server that now costs 50, $60 a month, was costing 300, 400, 500 a month. Yeah? And that was like the early days where there was a lot of kind of gold digger mood, and people were really making a lot of money in the early days with this stuff because nobody understood it, and there was also no marketing. Basically, it was just technical feature selling in the end. Yeah?
Wow.
And over time, in 2005, 6, I think this is when the cloud really started. Yeah, when Amazon, the bookshop, decided that their IT department is now a hosting provider. That's how I
Right.
would say it in simple words. And everyone was laughing. And I think after a few years, nobody was laughing anymore because Amazon Web Services, is now the largest infrastructure provider in the world.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you had software as a service providers step by step entering the market that compete to hosting providers that do shared hosting plus a site builder or shared hosting plus WordPress. And actually
Mm.
with a quite much more simpler user experience in many cases. Wix, Squarespace, Shopify, Webflow. But be careful. There is also drawbacks on these kind of platforms.
Mm.
But this was the time when these guys were coming into the market and said, like, this is an opportunity. And also, I would say what happened in this time, in the middle times, is early kind of new subcategories of services and players. So, and they're still around today. So let's say site builder for real estate. That is basically just like a hosting company that provides you all the tools just to build the real estate website,
Very
or all
specific.
these fancy funnel builders. Yeah, the famous Russell Brunson who wrote all these books with the click funnels. And this is also a multiple $100 million business these days. And the consolidation started. There was like Endurance International Group, what is now
Right.
called Newfold. There's GoDaddy, One and One Yonos, Team Blue, TWS, and the
Right.
Miss Group. All of them entered the consolidation with private equity, or later went public, or combinations of both. Yeah.
Mm.
So that was like the middle time when all this kind of stuff started. I would say when I look at it today, I think there is, because a lot of people made so much money in this industry, there's kind of a laziness in the industry to change and to adopt to change, because infrastructure is commodity, web hosting is
Mm.
commodity,
That's
websites are
interesting.
commodity, WordPress is commodity, differentiation is in many cases zero. But on the other side, there are now more and more subcategories of type of service providers. Yeah? And there is a future where I believe we can talk about it at the later stage as well. There is some future development that will help to get out of this. But I would say the service providers, the hosting providers who they never changed, they are in a very bad situation now.
Mm.
You are in a situation now where you either are in a very competitive market environment where you can almost not compete when we're talking about a cost per click price for VPS hosting of many dollars, yeah, per click.
Right.
And the same for shared hosting or for WordPress hosting. Or you sell your company, but if you didn't catch this opportunity to sell your company, you're not in a good situation in many
Interesting.
cases. And we continue celebrating on the CloudFest and stuff on these big events, but I think it's time to change.
Interesting. Very interesting. So what really captivated me was your assessment that the consolidation phase was a few years ago. And now we're in and yet another phase of the market where lazy companies that are not innovating or that didn't go through the consolidation process are finding themselves paying a lot of money for marketing and really struggling to grow.
It has different elements. First of all, this consolidation definitely started already probably 10 years ago,
Hmm.
probably earlier. especially if you look at Endurance International Group and GoDaddy when they started acquiring companies. The same for 1&1 Jonas. But the consolidation is still ongoing. And a part of the problems that are now in this market is, of course, also the consolidation that was using private equity or even going IPO. And these kind of movements have partially installed people in these companies that, in my humble opinion, should not be working in these companies. And because it's a kind of a corporate layer that is very difficult to deal with.
Right. Sort of getting in the way of dynamism at the company, getting in the way of innovation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so you spoke about the consolidation phase in the hosting industry, but WebPros has also had a history of mergers and acquisitions, and before WebPros, Plesk, Parallels, SW Soft, there were so many acquisitions going on for a few years there. It's very hard to keep track of all of the movements that happened. Can you talk about some pivotal moments in the development of what we now call WebPros?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, in the beginning it was configs, but at least for me, what was this German control panel. Then we had the acquisitions and consolidation into this SWSoft entity with Plesk, with Virtuoso, HSP Complete, was it was called, and Parallels Automation. And later there was another acquisition, what was basically Parallels Desktop. So interestingly enough, Parallels Desktop was a consumer product, and SWSoft took over this brand Parallels from this consumer product. This consumer product also resulted in the fact that we always had some challenges in the positioning of our company, because we have like a huge tech stack, or still had a huge tech stack for service providers out there. And the consumer product, what was the most famous product to run Windows on a Mac. This was always a little bit difficult to position. So the Parallels Desktop actually is now owned by Corel Software, famous
No way.
Corel Draw, if anyone still remembers
Yeah,
that or
that's
knows
a
that.
famous Canadian company from long ago.
Yep, exactly. And originally Parallels planned IPO. This was around 2006, and we had a whole layer of ex-Microsoft people in the management that should drive the company forward. In its stage, it was. I mean, we were at like 120, 130 million revenue at this time, consolidated, but all the profits were either coming from Parallels Desktop or from Plesk control panel, and a lot of other parts didn't make a lot of profit there.
Right.
But we wanted to do IPO, but suddenly what happened, 2007, 2008, the financial crisis hit in.
Right.
So this IPO was dead. Everyone was so excited to do this IPO. Our CFO, not so much, because the preparation for an IPO is a different story when you are the chief financial officer. They don't like that so much.
Yeah.
But so what happened is we did not go IPO. And so step by step, we still kept growing, but then at some point we got cut into pieces. So basically in 2015, but there was also preparation before, the Parallels Desktop was sold to Corel Software. Virtuoso became an independent company and still is today, with my friend Alex Fein running it. And then Plesk was carved out together with Oakley Capital and with two other German investors. They were the two founders of the CloudFest at this time, that are also still our investor. And so I personally had the luxury, because I knew both businesses, the automation business and the Plesk business. And I had the luxury to choose if I want to go with Plesk or with Ingram Micro, what is now called Cloud Blue. And I love scalable mass market selling, even to indirect partners. And I knew the finances of both divisions. So my decision was quick. I will join Niels and join Plesk. and jump into the cold water again because Niels asked me to build the marketing team there. So in between there were a lot of other smaller acquisitions. Sometimes we acquire products and we just kill the product. Also happened. We changed teams. It was all on an international level. Quite exciting, but also sometimes challenging for young people like us to adopt and to adjust ourselves. Yeah.
I mean, I from my perspective, looking in from the outside, just as a software vendor selling into the hosting industry, it always blew my mind how much how many dynamics were going on in the hosting industry with companies like WebPros, cPanel. I never quite could wrap my head around it. It all seemed to be moving so quickly, kind of like a cowboy mentality, a Wild West mentality in the industry. Do you think that mentality is gone from the industry now, or are there still cowboys out there in hosting?
I think there are a few left because hosting is so profitable,
Hmm.
or I think it's a little bit less, but it's still very profitable if you do it right.
Hmm.
There is a lot of cowboys who just operate hosting as a lifestyle business.
Right.
It pays them 1, 2, 3 million every year to the bank account, and I know personally multiple such people that are far away from trying. They never would want to sell the company. It
Right.
just pays them every year a few millions in the bank account that they say, I don't work a lot. This is a convenient time to be in. Why should I sell the company? And those are usually much more cowboys. They don't work a lot. They travel a lot. They party a lot. In the past, it was much more cowboys and more craziness and more parties and stuff. But I think especially the large scale providers, the most of the old guard has moved out, and now it's a more corporate kind of
Yeah.
environment in most of the larger, especially larger players.
Like
Yeah.
private equity driven. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that surprises me about the hosting industry is that there are still companies that are growing extremely fast. There are breakaway, it's like sometimes a company breaks away from the pack and it's just growing like crazy and it moves into the top 10. I don't want to name names, but one of our customers is one of those extremely fast growing companies that's become dominant. And I just don't understand how that can happen. It seems like hosting is so commodified. What could possibly cause a company to grow so quickly in such a commodified industry? Is it just, are they putting their cowboy hat back on, trying new approaches? Are they just not the lazy ones? What is it that drives a company so late in the game to grow so quickly?
I think there can be different parts. First of all, hosting globally, I mentioned some of it earlier. It's not so extreme anymore, but in many cases it was a shitty product. So to say, the web hosting is something that got hacked all the time. If you did WordPress, every few months you got hacked because the host didn't care about security tools. It was just a bad product. And I think
Hmm.
the first thing is today good product. Second is good speed,
Hmm.
performance, also for WordPress because that's difficult to achieve, and clear differentiation, very important. Not don't be everything for everybody. That's like in the startup world, very similar. And the last thing is probably marketing. A lot of hosting companies, I mean, especially if it's the long tail, not the few big ones that do very strong marketing, but the rest of it, they don't do much marketing.
Hmm.
And I think there is many of them, they don't even know what their customers are doing with their stuff. Yeah. And so those who actually realize that and start data mining their customers, start doing online marketing based on this segment they have chosen or the niche they have chosen, they can be much more successful together with a very good product. And that's definitely possible. And if you combine this with some kind of a community building, or you go to community events, like when you do WordPress specific hosting, that you actually go to the WordPress community, you go to the WordCamps, you actually care about these people, that's what the most are not doing. Yeah, the most of them
Right.
are like this lifestyle business cowboys kind of style and think everything sells itself. And if you do everything what I just said, I think there is a very good chance that you could still grow quite fast.
Huh, amazing. I want to talk a bit about private equity, the role of private equity in the industry. Obviously, WebPros was sort of a creation of private equity, but so were many of the other companies along the way that you've worked with on your journey. What's your view of private equity, and what has been your experience working with private equity firms generally along this journey?
I would say it depends how you look at it.
Hmm.
So when you think about when we carved out Plesk from Parallels, that required private equity also besides other investors. What later happened is that Plesk was much smaller than cPedal. We were competing for so many years against each other. And cPedal was more than double the revenue of Plesk. And with the help of private equity, we were able to take over cPedal. What is an amazing story. Eh?
Right.
So it opens up a lot of opportunities. The next thing is maybe a bit more challenging, where we have now, depends on how we look at our reputation in the industry, is price increases.
Hmm.
Because very classic private equity approach and M&A approach in general is every 1% that you increase your prices adds 10% to your bottom line or profit.
Right.
And on top of it comes cost optimization. And so that can be seen this or that way, you know. I mean, it's just fact that private equity, this is how it often works, yeah. And they are not doing any risky endeavors, yeah. And so the other thing with private equity is also if you are a hosting company or an owner of a hosting company, or you are part of WebPros and you work with private equity, the best you can do instead of just laying back and saying, oh, these evil investors, blah, blah, blah. The other thing you can do, and that's what I have done in the early beginning, is to try to learn how private equity actually works.
Mm.
So, why are they maybe a little bit slower? Why are they focusing on increasing prices and reducing costs? And also, why do they focus so much on a long term stable business?
Mm.
And the answer is private equity in the end is also kind of a broker. I mean, they are funds, but they are kind of a broker because they don't own this money. What private equity is
Right.
doing is they take the money from pension funds, from insurances, and maybe high net worth individuals that park their money for 5 to 8 years in a fund in exchange for a much higher interest rate. And obviously, if you think about this way, pension funds, that's also your money and my money, yeah?
Right.
So you don't want to be in a risky endeavor for private equity if your pension funds invest in it. Yeah? You know, when you look at venture capital, that is a kind of a sub-segment of private equity. This is,
Mm.
of course, very different. They are doing high risk. It's much more gambling. I can talk about that a bit later, maybe also, but venture capital is a very different game. But the key thing is with private equity is to understand them, how they operate. That makes it much clear on how you can work with them
Mm.
and what kind of business cases you can present and what maybe you should not present. Yeah? So that's like an important part. And last but not least, I can tell you, private equity, they are also humans. You can talk to other humans and you can make deals and you can discuss and you can arrange yourselves. Yeah. I mean, but understanding these mechanics, how they work, even though it's always about billions and billions of valuations and billions of dollars, and then they usually combine also 50% of the buying price of a valuation or of a company, they do with leverage from banks. But
Right.
that's like a huge challenge also, but it's also important to understand how this operates.
Interesting. So it's kind of like you just have to respect them for the animal that they are, and then it's easier, right? Because I think, especially in the tech business, private equity to some degree is seen as a little bit evil, to be honest, just to put it plainly. I mean, private equity companies come in and they do their cost cutting, they do their price increases. It feels like nobody is happy at the end of the day, other than whoever was investing in the private equity strategy.
This is on one side true.
Right.
On the other side, I think there have been also a lot of changes in the investor and private equity industry. If you look at it, it's not the 80s anymore. Where
Yeah.
this evil Wolf of Wall Street type of people walked in and cut the company into pieces, sell everything for cheap, and making a lot of money with it, and don't care about people. A lot of these private equity investors, they have a lot of requirements these days, for example, in terms of ESG and
Mm,
environmental, social, and governance. So that includes all these factors that are underneath the ESG umbrella, and that is also required by their customers, e.g., the pension funds or the insurances or other people who invest in these funds. They require that they are operating more ethical, more following climate, environment, and all these kind of things. I think it got a bit different, but that doesn't change that it's still there, that prices go up and costs need to go down. But it should be, I think today it will be done in many cases in a bit more ethical and fair environment than in the past.
right. Right. Yeah, I suppose that is a positive change. Um, and specifically, you've been through many transactions over the years, way more than most people actually in their career, I would think. Uh, the most recent transaction was with CVC Partners, is that correct? And what was that experience? What was it like working with really a top tier PE firm?
Honestly speaking, not so different than
Hmm.
with any other private equity. Yeah, it's it's an amount of you. It's a team of humans,
Right,
and the most important part is like for any startup or for any company you want to sell, you need a very good spread. You need a very good slide deck and a
right.
very good spreadsheet. That's usually what they're
Yes.
looking at. Yeah.
And have you been the guy to make the slide deck or the spreadsheet or both?
Yeah. I mean, I have created both, but most of it usually, especially the slide decks is slightly easier, especially for more recent acquisitions that we have done. I mean, I know the structure, what needs to be in there, and for a smaller deal, you don't engage with an expensive consulting company to actually do your slide deck.
Right.
And the financial modeling is always a combination with finance people. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying accounting, because accounting is backwards looking and
Right.
finance is like forward looking. And when you do forward looking calculation, one of these calculations is, for example, called discounted cash flow calculation. It's one of
Right.
the most classic ways of how you define future cash flows to at least as a part of evaluation of the company. It's never the only valuation, because there's many other ways to value a company. And creating such kind of calculation obviously needs a lot of business input and a
Hmm.
lot of analysis, research from the business side that says, like, here I think we can go in this direction, here we can in this direction, like strategic inputs, and then finance does their magic to create the final calculation.
So things like Monte Carlo simulations of future
I mean,
churn
I have never
values and
done a
things
Monte
like
Carlo
that.
simulation, and I think it
Yeah,
will not give you a better guarantee that the business will grow.
absolutely. I mean,
Usually,
it's just
simpler is
numbers,
better.
right? I've personally done lots and lots of financial modeling over the years, and it amazes me how powerful a good spreadsheet can be, where you just make some assumptions and you test the assumptions with your team to say like, okay, well, here's what we've got now. This is what we expect will happen. This is what we're aiming for, uh, and you figure out what the ratios seem to be between your revenue and certain expense items, that can be a really powerful model that allows you to nail your numbers year after year. I don't think you need a lot of fanciness.
No, absolutely. And you are in a subscription business like
Yeah,
we are.
yeah.
That makes it a lot easier to do the calculation. And so, I think usually simpler is better, and more better business input is also better than too much science and magic from a finance perspective.
I heartily agree with that. I've more than once, I mean, my background is engineering and math. And so when I approach a financing question, a budget question, I look to the mathematics, and my board often kind of laughs at me and they're like, "You boiled the ocean on this one. This is way too complicated. Let's talk about the fundamentals. And your model's really cool and everything, but what are what's the business doing? What are your actual plans for shifting things in one direction or another? How are you actually going to make sure that you retain the revenue that you've got on your P&L statement? And how are you going to increase your margins over time?" Those are like the really important questions to ask.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't want to boil the ocean on this particular question, but I do want to ask, when cPanel was acquired, and the price was increased, it really angered a lot of hosting companies, especially smaller hosting companies, and many of them responded to that by eventually leaving cPanel behind and going to some other alternative, cheaper control panel. At the end of the day, do you think that price change strategy worked out for cPanel, and did it work out for the investor?
I would say to a certain extent it played out, and to a certain extent it also produced churn. But I also had many discussions personally on an event like CloudFest. And, you mentioned cowboy mentality. I have talked to many people. One of my success recipes in working with hosting providers and service providers forever was that I always went to the hosting provider and said, like, okay, something doesn't work for you in your business in terms of your margins or your prices that you can charge to be in a competitive environment, etc., etc. And one of my biggest parts was always to actually do an open book calculation with the hosting providers and say, like, look, we make this amount of money. You have support infrastructure costs, you have marketing costs, you have support costs, and then you have a price that you can charge on the market that should be competitive to others. And that very quickly gives you a model, not fancy, simple model, in even just percentages, where in the end, we as an enabler can keep somewhere between 10, 15, 20% of the business maximum. So with the very large providers, much less in terms of from the end customer revenue that they do. And so the ones that complained the most to me, and I said, here's my business card. Please send me an email. Let's have a call. I want to personally look into your calculation, what doesn't work. And I'm happy to look at all you guys, how we can optimize this. And unfortunately, all the people I talked to where I gave my business card and sent a follow-up email after the last CloudFest, I never get any response to set up a call. So either they don't have this calculation because it was the lazy mode. We make a lot of money. The evil WebPros is increasing the prices, or they are already leaving us. But from the numbers that we see, our churn is not so strong. And also we are focusing to really enhance that core platform now with more innovations. We acquire companies where we afterwards provide a part of it bundled free of charge. We are very partner focused to help partners etc., etc. So there is a lot of opportunity also, but if you are a cowboy and your mind is a bit closed, it's very difficult to do business anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have done multiple different experiences, and also for whomever sees maybe that video here, we are always ready to talk, and we are always ready to look at your calculation and make sure everyone makes money in a reasonable way. But if we are not talking and you just write your things into some kind of a low-end box forum, I cannot do much about it. Yeah? And neither can do my colleagues from the management.
Yeah, interesting. I must say, price increases are always difficult. As a business, as a service provider, going to your customers and saying our price is increasing, it's never a good conversation. Nobody wants to hear it. But here's something I've noticed over the years. Well, mail channels is not considered the cheap option. We are considered the expensive option in the market. It's sort of considered to be more expensive to use mail channels than to do it yourself with open source, for example. However, we invest everything we make back into research and development to improve the product. A couple of years ago, we did some research in partnership with a company that collects data on the hosting industry in a really excellent quality data that allows us to assess which hosting companies are growing the fastest. And when we looked at the data between 2016 and 2022, nearly all of the top 10 hosting providers in terms of growth rate during that time used mail channels. Now, I can't confidently say that because they used us, they grew fast. I think what's more likely is that the companies that are growing fast see the value in spending money on an expensive option that delivers them a lot of value and allows them to focus on something else. For example, a hosting company, a kind of like old school hosting company run by a cowboy CEO, is hacking around in Perl and system commands and stuff to do a bunch of their own engineering, when there's probably a specialist vendor that could do a much better job for a little bit of money. But at the end of the day, if they spent their time focusing on marketing, they could grow their company way faster and make tons more money. And we've seen that. We've definitely seen that when we look at our fastest growing customers. They spend very little of their organization's effort mucking around on details that a vendor should be handling. So they're working with companies like WebPros. They're using Plesk and cPanel as their control panel. They're not using a bargain basement control panel. The fastest growing companies seem to be using the most expensive tools. I think that that's kind of more consistent with what you could call like the Silicon Valley way, which could be stated as money solves all problems. So if you're trying to grow, you put money into the right places and then you grow. Whereas there was this first phase of the hosting industry, where companies were run by engineers and IT guys, and a lot of the companies are still run by those same people, but maybe those are the lifestyle ones. Those are the ones that are making 1, 2, 3 million a year for the founder. They're very happy, but they're certainly not growing the way that the properly run companies are.
Absolutely. See it in the same way, yeah. And honestly, a lot of people where still some engineer is running the company. I'm not saying this is something bad, but some of them have never invested time in learning the business part of it. I think this is something where even me, after 20 years, I'm still learning, and some people, they just never learn. And that's becoming a problem, yeah. And so, but yeah, it's a topic on its own, and either you know how to grow a business or you don't.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's fine if you want to make a few $1 million a year and travel all the time. I guess that's an okay lifestyle,
Agree.
for many people.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about Plesk. So Plesk, for people in the audience who don't know about Plesk, it's a web hosting control panel that is widely used. Obviously, the Plesk brand is now owned by WebPros. But when you were at Plesk, you were the VP of Marketing and Strategic Alliances, and you built the entire marketing team. Now, my external view is that Plesk has always had extremely good marketing. The website's, always been really good. It always looked really polished. To be honest, it almost looked a bit like a Microsoft product. And you've mentioned Microsoft in the past. You've mentioned being inspired by their approach to marketing. How did your marketing strategies evolve for Plesk as the hosting industry itself matured? What did you do to embrace the change in the industry when companies were shifting from cowboy to private equity?
Absolutely. So I would say when I look back to parallels, we had really, really good product management. And later, when we got all these Microsoft people in, we also added very good product marketing. And this is where, when I said I learned marketing, I actually learned product marketing, because at this time in 2006, 7, 8, etc., we didn't do too much online marketing. You know, when we carved out Plesk, and I took over the marketing team after I was lucky to be able to learn all that stuff and apply a lot of stuff in practice. I can tell you the first thing that I actually did is I killed $250,000 PR budget, because
Wow.
in 2015 and even today, PR is important, but only if you do it right. If you build relationships with journalists, if you actually have news and not something from 20 years ago, if you are not spammy, etc. Like if you really build the PR strategy, you can do PR. But otherwise, better use this budget in a different way. So the first 250K, I killed completely this PR budget. And then what we did in exchange, plus additional investment, of course, is that we doubled down on online marketing. And I basically hired a whole team of online marketing specialists based out of Barcelona in Spain, multicultural, multi-language, wonderful environment. I still work from there from time to time. And that gave us specialists in the area of design, copywriting, SEO, content marketing, paid advertisement, like you name it, like social media management. And so that really brought up our initial push on focusing on online marketing. And this online marketing was also including stuff like an online community. When you look up the Plesk online community on Facebook, has over 6,000 members today. And it's probably one of our best places where we can get feedback also from end customers, meaning not the SMB really, because the SMB really gets the solution, but the agencies and freelancers that are sometimes the hoster's end customer or reseller. We get a lot of feedback there. The second thing what we did also is change the event strategy a little bit towards end customers, meaning web professionals. That's actually one of the reasons why WebPros is called WebPros, because it's focusing on web professionals. They're the actual users of our products, and the service providers are kind of a fulfillment engine for us. And the end customer then is the SMB. So what we did is, because we decided to double down on WordPress, meaning we looked at all the most innovative WordPress providers out there that did not use our products, stole all their features, and basically created the WordPress toolkit, where you manage different WordPress installations, staging, cloning, backup, automated security, premium security options, whatever you name it. It's doing everything and much more today. And WordPress toolkit is also completely adopted to cPanel in exactly the same way. It's the same product inside cPanel. You don't see that the actually former Plesk team is developing that.
Huh.
Last but not least, in terms of marketing, we started attending WordCamps. WordCamps are the international events of WordPress, and we started building relationships. We started contributing to WordPress, and we really went into this community because if you want end users, and when you say shared hosting is kind of a platform as a service in modern terms, you need to be very close to the people that use your stuff. And that allowed us to also get a lot of feedback and continuously improved. And of course, the other thing that we also did as part of the initial creation of the marketing team, because I was running marketing and strategic alliances, e.g. business development, we also started to be present on all hyperscale cloud marketplaces and their events, and did co-marketing with them, and started building our ecosystem, what is now a 20 million plus business.
Wow.
Growing still 20% year over year, of third-party products integrating into Plesk. And of course, continue to position us as an expert in the service providers industry, helping the SMB market being successful in their digital journey. And so this is something that we really implemented in 2015, maybe last but not least, but I also implemented what is still being used today, is what I call a messaging and positioning framework. That's something I also learned from the Microsoft people.
Yeah.
This is something where you say, okay, we take the value proposition canvas, jobs to be done, pain creators, painkillers, gain creators. Based on this, you create a messaging house, basically. So you in the Plesk scale, that still today it's called Build, Secure, Run, and then we put all the benefits, not just the features, but the benefits under these pillars. And afterwards, we had a Twitter-friendly elevator pitch of Plesk that means less than 140 characters. It was on this time, now called X. It's a bit different.
Yeah.
Then one messaging block in 25 words and 50 words and then 100 words. And this was the original foundational document that I created with the team, and it's still in place today. I told them many times, please change it, please adapt it to the newer environment. But it seems to be okay for now that the Plesk original messaging and positioning framework still works. And this is absolute foundational work that you need to do, because this is then going to be the description when someone asks, what is Plesk? That's the first thing. And the answer is everything you need to build, secure, and run websites, applications, and hosting businesses.
Right.
I can still speak this today, this elevator pitch. And that's also the description page on every hyperscale cloud marketplace. It's any partner marketing materials. It's on any giveaways, the Build, Secure, Run. It's like everywhere. And if you don't define this up front, you will never have a good marketing.
Very interesting. So it kind of creates a consistent appearance of your brand
Marketing
everywhere.
is consistent, always.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Same message over and over again. I love it. I think that's a powerful insight. An advisor to me shared a marketing framework, a marketing messaging framework with us a few years ago, and it was really helpful. To capture the essential things, like you said, like different columns, and then to have everybody speaking the same message everywhere. It makes your company seem like, oh, this is what they do. There's no ambiguity. And you also end up wasting less time crafting a message over and over again for each different scenario. You just have the same message. You go to your sort of playbook and you say, well, which thing is appropriate for now? And then copy and paste that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things that you comment about in your on your personal website is the concept of servant leadership. Can you talk a bit about the concept of servant leadership and how that has been a successful leadership strategy for you over the years?
Well, there are different definitions of servant leadership. Yeah? I have kind of my own, and I think for me, it's a set of building blocks on how you interact with humans. Yeah, because leadership is not only the people that are in your team, but leadership can also be even in a independent position. Yeah, so you can be a leader. But I would say it's multiple building blocks. For me, these building blocks include, not limited to, I would say, I often use start with why, meaning it takes me only 30 seconds more when I ask someone to do something to tell this person also why we are doing this.
Mm.
The topic of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic
Mm.
motivation. I also believe that as a leader, you are in charge of your people and helping them, and they are not in charge of you. So my first thing when I deal with people in my team is, how are you? How can I help? And I learned this from my mentors because this is a very important part, because then the discussion starts. And I also practice usually a rhythm, very strong rhythm of business with people. That I do even today in M&A, by the way, that I have a very strong rhythm of business. So rhythm of business with a team, I can explain you with based on the sales team or based on the marketing team,
Mm.
is I'll have a group call once a week. The group call, everyone talks about its projects, where they are working on, and where they need help from each
Mm.
other. This also creates some kind of bit of a group thinking, that if one person does never anything, it will be pushed from the team at some point. And then, of course, I will do one-on-ones either once a week or every 2 weeks. But once a week is maybe a good term. Then I would say, as a leader, you need to be open for criticisms, so that you are open that people can actually criticize you as a manager as well. Another component for me is I never steal ideas from other team members and sell them as my own. Whenever I actually take ideas from a team member, I quote them that they had a good idea, because they might also need a promotion in the future, when they had a good
Right.
idea.
Right.
And if we discuss a project or certain problems, and if a team member has a better idea than me, I'm more than happy to take the idea of this person and promote this also, that this person had this idea. And I think maybe last but not least, this is because I was so young when I started
Mm.
working internationally, is always take multicultural aspects into consideration with every action. An American person or a Spanish person or a French person or a German person or a Swiss person, they all have their own kind of cultural kind of thing. Of course, we are all humans, but they are in a certain environment with specific cultural aspects. And I think as a leader, it's very important to be aware of this and also to take care of this in the way on what you expect from the people, or how you interact with the people. I would say this is like the rough components that I see as part of leadership that helped me a lot to work with people over time. Yeah.
Fascinating. I mean, yeah, this is something that is not talked about enough, in my opinion. People love talking about businesses and how, they did this transaction or that transaction, but really, each passing week, you're working with your team. And if you don't have a strong team, if you're not really connected with what's going on for them, if you're not helping them in their careers, you can't execute these big moves, right? You can't do it all by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Uh,
you can talk forever about
yeah.
diversity and equity and
Yeah.
inclusion, and about values that you defined on some papers and that nobody lives it. That's something that I also know how to do, but it's very it's not practical in the end.
So the web hosting industry, you've been a part of the web hosting industry, as a key vendor for many years, for 20 years. Where do you see the industry going in the next 5 years? I mean, we hear so much about generative AI, serverless computing. Obviously, the hyperscaler clouds are even more hyperscaled than ever. They're connecting directly to nuclear power plants to power massive farms of GPUs. Like, there's just been so much change. Looking ahead for the next 5 years, what do you think we're going to see in like hosting? What's the next 5 years look like?
Right. Of course, it's not so easy to predict the future, and
Yeah.
hosting has been a kind of a business that stayed almost the same for a very long time. I think one of the developments that we see is that more and more good hosting companies transform from a generalist to be a specialist.
Mm,
That they finally start to learn from their data, or they get data to find out that the majority of their customers is actually lawyers
right.
and need to do a lawyer specific offering. Just an example. Finally, do marketing based on this. I think that will also be a big thing, and learn the modern business framework to rethink your business, especially if you have an engineering background, and also use and apply AI to your business. There's no excuses anymore. I think there will be probably much more successful businesses coming out of this just because AI is there. I would say AI is going to be a disruptor, but specifically for hosting, maybe not as fast, as deep we think. We first of all already use a lot of AI, especially for example in cPanel or in Plesk. There is already today a lot of algorithms and automations happening in
Sure.
the background to keep the infrastructure performant, to keep it up
Hmm.
to date, to do security. I would say WordPress is here to stay. It's
Yeah.
43% of the market, and the most people don't understand why WordPress is so big. And I can tell you, I think I know why WordPress is so big, and why not everyone wants to use Wix and Squarespace and Shopify. When
Yeah.
you have your website on Wix and Squarespace and Shopify, and they don't like something, even something small, they may just switch off your thing. And that means your business is offline. And if you use WordPress, it's open source. It has more than 60,000 plugins as an ecosystem.
Right.
It has also WooCommerce, what is a complementary e-commerce engine. Maybe it's a bit more difficult, but it is also more than 40% of the e-commerce market. That's, people don't realize this. So
Wow.
WordPress, from my perspective, is here to stay, but it will get better. It will get easier to use, and it will get influenced by AI. And so will the software as a service players like Wix and Squarespace
Hmm.
and all these kind of companies, Shopify. I think in the beginning they won through user experience. Now they're trying to compete with Wix Studio and Shopify Plus. Like, they want to go after the players that want more flexibility. But that
Right.
also means it's it's going more complicated to use. Then it's not then this argument is not there anymore for simplicity. And I would say what the hosting companies will hopefully do, and I think the bigger ones do that already, is to adjust to the younger generation. I was also a sysadmin 26 years ago, 27 years ago, and I think a lot of hosting companies are still kind of sysadmins and position themselves towards sysadmins. I think that's something where we need to get ready for the younger generation to come, because the SaaS players already do that.
Right.
I would say that hyperscale cloud has also an interesting take there. I would say, when you are a hoster that has you're probably just data centers in one country and want to go global, you can
Right.
actually partner with hyperscale cloud and use all their other data centers for going global. That's the clever service providers already do. That you keep the control over the data I mentioned before. That will be an
Right.
important topic, never ever done before, because there was GDPR in Europe. There is different kind of GDPR, similar privacy laws in the United States. India has its own version. Brazil has its own version. and many other countries as well. That potentially gives hosting an opportunity again, also that in country or being a local company in the country is more important again. And
Right.
probably the wars and the reduction in globalization that we have in today's time might also contribute to this trend that you will have actually more regional operations again, what would help the hosting providers again. And other than that, I think there is kind of an early sign of some hosting companies being just marketing players,
Hmm.
because Bluehost, for example, that is part of Newfold, has now first time launched its own premium WordPress offering that is based on infrastructure from Automatic, like the company behind
Wow.
WordPress,
Literally just
like
a
on
wrapper.
WP.cloud. And
Wow.
WP.cloud is a highly scalable WordPress as a service API first infrastructure platform for WordPress. So there can be such kind of trends as well, that there's kind of a hosting as a service going
Right.
on. And maybe last but not least, what I recommend the most hosting providers and what the more successful ones are already doing is, when you look at the cloud, infrastructure as a service, software in platform as a service, and software as a service, decide on which of these layers you're going to play,
Hmm.
because you cannot play on all the layers and become best within that competitive environment on the layer that you choose, or maybe you are best at already.
Hmm.
You know, it's a very unknown fact. You mentioned you had a lot of data. We have also a lot of crawling data that we do every quarter about the hosting industry and what is
Hmm.
changing. A lot of small and mid-sized hosting companies are surprisingly using infrastructure from companies like Hetzner
Right.
or from OVH, especially in the emerging markets. And I think, talking about the emerging markets, I think there is still a way to go, especially in emerging markets. There's still so many SMBs not even having a website today.
Yeah.
And you can argue, well, it's a mobile society, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to do real business, at some point you will need a computer, and don't do everything on your mobile. And then you need a website and build your applications and stuff. So I think these are different topics. I would say that at least influence the future of hosting, and we will yet see who will make it out of this pure play hosting and find its niche and be able to successfully transform from a generalist to a specialist.
I mean, that's really fascinating. I think there's probably, there's probably a role for this specialization within some of these hosting conglomerates that have been put together. You mentioned companies like the MIS Group. Your Online is another example from Europe, where they're consolidating. They're just buying tons of hosting brands all over the world, and they're putting them under one corporate banner. They have standards across their group, but the companies continue to operate rather independently. And so I wonder if one of the sort of future trajectories of the hosting industry is that we see this consolidation happening, but group members within a hosting group all have the opportunity to specialize into a particular layer or geography in the future. You mentioned privacy laws giving local companies a bit of an advantage, right? We're definitely seeing that. When GDPR came out, we had some questions about it. We engaged a law firm to analyze the situation, to write a white paper. But then, aside from occasionally doing a data protection addendum with a client, we didn't see much of it. In the last 6 months, we've had so many requests for DPAs from customers. It has really become an actual issue, and we've had to re-engage privacy experts to help us navigate that territory. But I think out in the hosting industry, it is probably handing a bit of an advantage to local providers. You also spoke about emerging markets. I definitely see a lot of activity happening in emerging markets, even in places like Sri Lanka. There are thriving hosting providers, even though the economy in that country is a real basket case.
Bangladesh, for example, in
Right?
Africa, in some countries. And
Absolutely.
look at it. You and me, we are living in some kind of fancy Western countries,
Yeah.
with high costs and high salaries. But imagine if someone is in Bangladesh or in an African country that might be less developed, not all, but some they are less
Yeah.
developed, and you make as a small team of 3 people, you make $2,000 extra a month, or you make $5,000 extra a month. That's actually huge money for
Huge money.
in such kind of country.
Yeah, and I think that there's this perception that there's not very much money in the third world, but that's actually not true. There's a lot of poor people. There's definitely a lot of people living on $2 a day, which is awful. But many of these countries that I think we might have previously thought were never going to digitize are rapidly going there. Certainly, some of our fastest growing customers are located in South Asia, in parts of the world that were probably the last to become digitized, and they are rapidly going online. I'm personally very excited for what the future holds in those parts of the world, because I think that the digitization of business it ultimately raises the standard of living in those countries. They haven't been able to benefit from a lot of what the internet has brought to the West, even in terms of how it contributes to democracy. We don't think much of having a WordPress site where we can just have a blog and express ourselves, but in countries that are poorly managed, having a WordPress site and being able to express yourself online makes a huge difference. In the West, it's just maybe my opinions on fashion or something like that. But in other parts of the world, they can be pushing really important issues and being quite disruptive and progressing their society.
Absolutely, yeah. And also many of the emerging markets, they basically skipped some steps that we went through in the West. I remember I used 43 kilobits modems
Right.
on a Windows 3.1 and later on Windows 95. And then I moved to ISDN. I'm not even sure if you had that in the US.
I remember ISDN. It was hard to get it, but I worked
Yes.
for us. I was the first employee at a electronics company in 1999, and
Right. So
we
my
got
favorite was
yeah.
ISDN channel bundling. You got
Oh
120
yeah.
kilobits. And so I managed to do some business online even when I was like 16, 17 during my teenager years. And but the emerging markets, they didn't go through all this. They directly went from nothing to mobile,
Yeah.
and mobile provided internet. And now we have Starlink on top of it,
Right.
where you get
Right.
for $100 a month, you get 100 megabits all over the world.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Bill Gates has really done a good job of publicizing, right? Because he's gone to Africa with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's gone to Africa and he's kind of shown the world what's the amazing innovation that's going on in these parts of the world that everybody had forgotten about and just assumed were poor basket cases. But there's actually a lot of real local innovation and leapfrogging going on that's tremendously exciting. I think
Absolutely.
Starlink has surprised all of us. I bought the original Starlink antenna when it came out because I just had to see what it was all about, and I fired it up in the backyard, and I got 300 megabits per second and 20 millisecond latency.
Oh,
And my
wow.
first thought was, this is going to change everything, because I obviously I can get wired internet where I live, but I could be in the middle of the mountains and get 300 megabits per second. What about the middle of Africa? I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And this opens up the whole internet for all these people,
right.
if it's in Africa or if it's in Asia in some of the countries or in India. And I think this is actually very exciting because This is another, how is it famously said, another 1 or 2 billion people coming online
Right.
to participate in these operations and to make this world become one. Yeah.
Yeah, and they say, and I believe this, that the reason why, I mean, bar Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there haven't been any major conflicts in the West since the Second World War between Western countries. One of the reasons for that is that we trade with each other. So if you've got two democratic governments where the people want to continue being prosperous, they're going to tell their government, please don't get into a war with our neighbors. Like, we want to make money, just let us make money and travel between each other and have friends and stuff. I think that the rollout of the internet and hosting services by extension to every corner of the world, to countries where they either don't have much of a democracy or don't have a democracy at all, it starts to make that kind of thing possible for a lot more countries. You just spread more information. You give people access to be able to learn everything online.
Their country leaders allow them to use this in this way is another question. And I
Right.
would say, from a German expression that we use, your word in God's ear. We have. I was hoping about what you just said for many years also, that this is going to be the case. Today, I need to say, I think it's a matter of one more generation,
Right.
because humans stay humans. And if you look at the countries that actually start the war, or that are very authoritarian and so
Hmm.
on, it's mostly the old generation, old
Yeah.
people. They know what they're doing, but they know the next generation will do this differently. And it's we will see how it goes. I mean, I have a very visionary uh, idea of where this could bring us, especially with crypto and blockchain, and
Mm.
specifically blockchain, because Switzerland is probably one of, besides the United States to a certain extent, the
Hmm.
only countries that really do this direct democracy, where you have your
Right.
ballots and your initiatives and all that stuff, where you can vote on. And the blockchain is kind of the digital version of this direct democracy.
Right.
And I strongly believe that if you would ever think about a world government, that if we could arrange ourselves somewhere democratically legitimated, not through these organizations that we have right now, you could use blockchain to do that. But
Mm.
you know what? We are still in a world of nation states. We agreed on that system, that nation states is our foundation. And unless we find a way and arrange ourselves to use what we have and kind of build a more or less fair democratic international system, I think we are so far away from this. Yeah, because the people who are currently in power, and I don't do conspiracy theories, the people who are currently in power, they're not interested in giving more power to the people in many
Mm.
cases.
Mm.
And so we would have everything what is needed. Yeah, in the beginning it was trade, or like until 20 years ago it was trade. Now it's more technology. I cross fingers that what you said is actually going to happen, but it's yet to be seen.
I think so. Yeah. Well, I think this is a really good place to end our conversation. But I think we should talk again and maybe speak more about your ideas around blockchain. Uh,
Anytime.
yeah, absolutely. I can tell you my own story of being involved with Bitcoin in 2011 and how that went. Anyways, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast today, Lukas, and learning so much about your history at WebPros, your impressions of the hosting industry's past and future, and your advice to entrepreneurs and managers on how they can run their teams effectively. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate